Perfect. Okay, let's get started. So good evening, everyone. I would like to welcome our four wonderful panelists and all of our guests who are tuning in live to our Echoes of War panel discussion. I would also like to acknowledge for those of us who are in Juneau, we are on Tlingit Ani, the ancestral land of the Okwan and Takuquan. And for the three panelists who are on St. Paul, they are on the traditional Unanga land. I would also like to recognize that today is Indigenous Peoples Day, and we at the Juneau-Douglas City Museum are very excited to be hosting this discussion. I am Niko Sanguinetti. I am the Curator of Collections and Exhibits at the Juneau-Douglas City Museum, and I will be moderating the discussion tonight. And I would like to introduce our four panelists, and afterward, I will ask that each of you please tell us a little bit more about yourselves. So I'll go one by one, and then we'll circle back around for the additional information. So first of all, we have Zaneta Melavidov, who is affectionately known as Kuka Z, and you'll notice most of us speaking tonight will refer to her as Kuka. And we have Jacob Merculiff, who is the mayor of St. Paul. We have Serafima Edelen, who is the local and traditional knowledge coordinator at the Ecosystem Conservation Office for the Pribilof Islands Aleut community of St. Paul Island. And we have Martin Stepetin Sr., who is newly elected to the Juneau School Board. So I'd like to start with Kuka Z, if you don't mind. Tell us just a little bit about yourself before we get going.
Oh, my name is Zaneta Melavidov. I'm, right now I live in St. Paul. I've lived here all my life. And I think I'm the St. Paul cook. I feed the whole island, especially in the native food. I had a big birthday party yesterday. It didn't end till almost 4. Now I'm paying for it. And I just, not getting older, seems like I'm getting younger.
Perfect. Thank you, Kuka.
Yeah.
And next, I'll ask Jacob Merculiff. Wouldn't mind telling us a little bit about yourself.
Okay, good evening. I'm Jacob Merculiff. I live on St. Paul Island, Alaska. My parents are Alexei and Marilu Merculiff. My dad passed away in 2008, and I've lived in St. Paul most of my life. I was born on St. George Island, Alaska. I lived there for the first 11 years of my life. My family moved to St. Paul because there was transportation issues, and I had a older sister that went to school in Mount Edgecombe, and it was pretty hard to get a hold of her and send her stuff. And my grandparents are Lawrence and Natalia Prokopyov. My great grandparents are Peter and I can't remember my great grandmother's name. They were originally from Mattu, so I decided to wear some regalia in their honor. I've lived on St. Paul for most of my life. I presently serve as the mayor, but I'm also a tribal council member. That's how I got involved with the Funtor Bay issues. I do like hunting, fishing, and living off the land here, and I enjoyed coming down to Juneau and looking over some of the stuff. Hopefully in the near future, I'll be able to go down to Funtor Bay. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for being here, Jacob. Next, Serafima, if you wouldn't mind telling us a little bit about yourself.
Serafima Edelen. My family is originally from St. George. I grew up in St. Paul. We moved away when I was 11, and 7 years ago, I decided to move back. I've been with the tribal government for 5 years now, and just over a year in this position.
Thank you. And Martin.
Unmute myself. Thank you, Niko. Ong. My name is Martin Stepton, Senior. I'm originally from St. Paul Island, Alaska. I grew up there, graduated high school there before moving off to Job Corps, but I found my way here to Juneau in 2011. I've been living here since with my wife Ann and our 4 children. And since moving here, I come in contact and started working with Friends of Admiralty Island, and from there we begun working with a Funtor Bay project and all the wonderful work we've done so far with the museum and bringing panels to Funtor Bay and trying to get the land protected out there. And I've been it's been a work of love and joy. So I'm happy to be here doing this, and thank you, Niko, and the Juneau-Douglas Museum for hosting this tonight.
Thank you, Martin. Okay, so we have a list of questions we're going to talk through. Everyone here has been very involved with the Funtor Bay larger project. So I wanted to start off talking a little bit about the history of the Pribilof Islands, us here down in Juneau and around the world. You know, the Pribilof Islands are very far away. So we wanted to learn a little bit more about the history of this particular and unique place. So if Sarah, you wouldn't mind telling us a little bit about the Pribilof Islands and their history.
So while I was preparing for this panel discussion, I was trying to decide what I was going to talk about when it came to the history. And I guess I had a hard time trying to remember, and I had to do my research again. Depending on who you ask will decide who they tell you found the Pribilof first. The Pribilof were known well before the Westerners discovered the island. St. Paul is called Tana Amech, land of mother's brother. The islands were found of a son of an elder Unangax island. Hunter went out hunting and came across the island. And it wasn't until, excuse me, 1788 when the Russians discovered the Pribilof. Excuse me. So when the Russians discovered the Pribilof, this is when the fur seal trade, northern fur seal pelt trade, slavery all started. Some of that is also talked about through this discussion and through the history of evacuation and internment. During internment, Unangan were brought back to the islands for the fur seal harvest to collect pelts. And that went on for years. 1983 was when Congress passed the Fur Seal Act amendments, which ended government control of the fur seal harvest. And there's a lot of history that goes behind the fur seal harvest. And that's a little too much to talk about here. But, excuse me. Sorry, guys. The history of the Pribilof Islands is very extensive. And I think with the internment and evacuation having a lot of history in itself, I think we should focus more on that. So if everyone's ready to kind of dig in.
Sorry, trying to unmute myself as well. Just briefly before we get to a little bit of the history of the evacuation and the internment, I was hoping, Jacob, if you wouldn't mind speaking a little bit to about the Unanga culture that we discuss here in the exhibit.
Well, can you repeat the question again, please?
Sure, I was wondering if you wouldn't mind telling everyone watching a little bit about the Unanga culture that exists on the Pribilof Islands.
Well, in the beginning, I believe we did have a lot of people involved in our Unangan culture, and when the government and the Russians first involved the people in the northern fur seal harbors here after discovery of the islands, a lot of it was kind of put on the back burner, and our people weren't able to participate. And probably about 10 or 15 years ago, or more like 20 years ago, the school started some Aleut programs teaching the Unanga language, and the women, Edna Fulmanov, Aquilina Bordakovsky, and a few others worked to bringing up Aleut dancing and Aleut language. And maybe about 10 years ago, I got involved as a Aleut dancer. It's kind of slowed down a little bit now, but my regalia, you can see, is part of my dancing outfit that I decided to wear as an honor for the people here. I grew up listening to my parents speak Aleut, but in the old days, when they were young kids, the government used to put soap in their mouth if they tried to speak Aleut, and I listened, but I never really grew up speaking the language. I understand a little bit. I think Z probably would have a better knowledge in how things were, and she grew up speaking Aleut pretty good. Thank you.
Thank you, Jacob. We appreciate that. To build off of what Serafima and Jacob were speaking about, Martin, would you like to tell us a little bit more about the history of the evacuation and internment at Funtor Bay?
Yes, thank you, Niko. I just wanted to add on to a little bit of Jacob's history, just, as far as Aleut culture, the Aleut people have been around for, 10,000 years, and pre-contact, we were a people of more than 20,000 strong all throughout the Aleutian chain, and with a rich culture, and so I just wanted to add that we've been around for a real long time. So as far as the Aleut evacuation goes, though, so what happened in 1942, in June 1942, after the war had been raging throughout the Aleutian chain for some time, and the military and the U.S. government trying to decide what to do with the Aleuts throughout the Aleutian chain, indecisiveness, confusion. They already had evacuated all the white people off the island, all the white people throughout the chain, and they didn't know what to do with the Alaska Natives. And so the decision was made to evacuate them eventually, but there was no pre-planning, there was no preparation in place, and so with 1 day's notice, everybody from St. Paul and St. George were told to pack one bag, and you guys will be getting on a boat, and they proceeded with evacuating the islands. And this began a 2.5-year process. For some communities, over 3 years, being away from their island. And for us in the Pribilofs, we were taken to Funtor Bay, 477 people from St. Paul and St. George, and along with 83 other people from Atka were also brought to to Funtor Bay for a short period of time, and they were dropped in Funtor Bay, but the facilities were so small and so terrible that they quickly figured out that they couldn't keep all the people in Funtor Bay, so they took the Atka people from Funtor Bay and took them down to Killisnoo Island, where there was some other facilities that weren't any better, and they left the Atka people in Killisnoo, which is near Angoon, and so basically just dropped them off with no food, no shelter, 4 or 5 blankets maybe, no running water in these buildings, no heat, nothing. So the first casualty came, on the way to southeast near Kodiak. I think a young girl died. But before this is all over and done with, before we all came home, whenever they were evacuating the islands, they didn't know it yet, but 20% of the population from those communities would be decimated. People died. A lot of people died because of this inappropriate planning. And just in all reality, it was the government didn't care. They didn't. And so that is a short, brief overview of what happened, but we could go into it some more. I don't know how much more I could go. You want me to go into it, Niko? But that's just kind of what I thought of when I was thinking of it. Of course, you could get deep into this and talk a lot about it.
No, definitely, completely understand, especially working through this project and working on this particular exhibit. There's so much material that you can go through, and there's so much story to tell from so many different voices. It's difficult to sort them all out and to include everything in one go. So we appreciate you taking the time to give us a bit of an overview for those who are tuning in who maybe haven't heard this story or haven't been to see the exhibit. So thank you very much for that. In a moment, I'd like to introduce one of our co-chairs for the larger Funtor Bay working group. This group is based here in Juneau, but it's made up of a dedicated group of people from across the state. And the group currently has 3 initiatives that it's been working on. Some folks in this group have been working for 5 to 6 years. A few of us have been on for a little bit shorter, but all in all, everyone involved has been incredibly dedicated. And so they've been working on 3 main initiatives with the hopeful 4th at some point. But the first one would be a legislative bill that is aimed at protecting the cemetery at Funtor Bay. Currently, it's on public land, more or less, and the hope is to move it to be part of the existing Alaska State Marine Park. And due to COVID-19, the bill was stalled in the Senate. So it's been pre-filed for next year, and will hopefully move quickly through the Capitol once the legislative session starts. The second initiative was the museum exhibit, which is currently installed and will be on display until October 2021. So for those of you here in Juneau, feel free to come by. We're open Monday through Thursday, 10 to 4, and that will help tell this story to the best of our ability. And so we're very excited about that. The third initiative is the installation of interpretive panels actually on site at Funtor Bay. Currently, there are people who have cabins out there. There are people who come in for fishing, for boating, for hiking, for pleasure activities. And we've heard time and time again from people who have spent a lot of time there that they've never heard anything about this event and they've seen nothing. So while it's not a highly trafficked area, the group does feel that it's very important that that history is recognized. So currently those panels are in the design phase with the hope of installation during celebration of 2020, which will be in 2021. So the third initiative is in the works, which is pretty exciting. So I just wanted to share a quick video from Rick Yanalino. He said he's one of our co-chairs for the larger Funtor Bay working group. And this video describes a little bit about what led him to become involved in this particular project. So I am just going to share my screen. And here we go.
Hi, I'm Rick Yanalino. I live here in Juneau, and I'm co-chair the larger Funtor Bay planning group here, which is the museum and the legislature, and certainly the museum. I also am on the board of Friends of Admiralty. I've been working on this project probably, well, the first contact was about 30 years ago with Andrew Kashavarek, deacon, was having tea at Father Michael Alexa Cassania's house. And he mentioned that he hadn't been in Juneau in 50 years. And I wasn't 50 years old then. And I asked him, what were you doing in Juneau? And he said, well, I'm from St. George. And we were, my family, were interned at Funtor Bay on Admiralty Island. We were interned in a camp, and I was 16, so I was sent to Wrangell, and I was one of the really lucky ones. I just lost my language and culture. And I said, that doesn't sound that lucky. He said, well, my other younger relatives all died of cold, starvation, disease. So I was a lucky one. And he got sent to, later, 16, to build soldier barracks for World War II across where Tlingit Haida is now in Juneau. And he was able to send money to the camp, to his family, because they were starving, they had no money. So he was able to send food and money to them. So that's when I first found out about Funtor Bay. I was outraged. I didn't know much about it, but I started studying. Yes, and I decided 30 years ago, if I ever have a chance to do something to make this people aware of what the government did to people during World War II, I'm going to do it. So then I'm on the board of Friends of Admiralty Island, and we were on a boat ride out to Kilisnu, where the Atka internment camp and graveyard, and Bishop David did the blessing of the graves. And I met Martin and Ann Stepetin on board. And we started talking. And they said, who's sponsoring this? And I said, Friends of Admiralty. And he said, I want to join. And we're just across from Funtor Bay. And he points at Funtor Bay and he said, my grandparents were in that camp, and they were married at 13. And my father was born in Juneau but raised in the camp. Most of the kids who were born in the camp didn't make it sounds like. But he was a lucky one, again, his father. And he said, I want people to know what happened. And so I said, I'll help you. And we've been working.
Great. Perfect. Sorry about that. So unfortunately, we weren't able to interview our second co-chair, which is Mary Lekanov, and her husband Flory was interned. He was from St. George, and she tells stories about how she had been married to him for years and didn't know that that had happened to him until much, much later. And she has been very passionate about furthering this project and has just been very dedicated. So want to recognize her and thank her for all of her work as well. So next up, Kuka, I would like to ask you if you could tell us just a little bit about what it's like living on the Pribilof Islands so far away from what most of us consider to be kind of normal life.
Well, I grew up here. I got married in 64, 65, and my husband took me to Fort Lewis. I lived there for 3 years. I didn't like, I was so homesick. It's not like living out in the lower 48s and stuff. It's not like home. Like now, this COVID, all my children want to come back home. Home is home. You're free. You can do whatever you want. And everybody was so kind and always helped each other and did things together. I remember crocheting with my grandma and my mom, my cousins, did seal for arts and crafts. And it was good. The school was good. Sometimes I tell my children that I wish the government days would come back because we had all those things to do. We had a lot of things. We had movie theaters, coffee shops, steam baths. Now there's nothing. I feel bad for the younger generation here. They have nothing. It's just terrible. And I miss playing Parcheesi. Most of our elders are gone. I played Parcheesi, and we'd go to the grandma's house, we'd go to a friend's house and have coffee, play Parcheesi. It was a lot of fun in my days. We had a lot to do. We played outside all the time. We played Henny Penny, Kick the Can, Hide and Seek. We did all those. I always talk about this to my cousins and my friends. Sometimes they say we wish they bring them old days back, but I always say technology took everything. Once TV came up here, there was no more movie theaters because the reel-to-reel films got expensive. They couldn't afford to have the movies anymore because the films got expensive. And telephones came. There was hardly any more people talking on the VHF radios. Like every house had a VHF radio. That's how they communicated. I used to love waking up in the morning, hear them old people talking in Aleut language, laughing and talking on the radio. That was our alarm in the morning because the elders used to get up for 5, 6 o'clock in the morning and we hear them talking before we go to school. That was good. That was fun. That's how I learned how to speak Aleut from my mom and dad. My dad would question me in Aleut and I'd look, duh, I don't know what you're saying. Then he used to tell me in English first, and then he translated to me in Aleut. That's how I learned Aleut. I picked it up real quick, learning the English first, trying to tell me what he's trying to say in Aleut. He'd tell me in English. Then second time come around, he'd ask me in Aleut, so I had to remember, what did he say? What? So I used to have to answer him back in Aleut, not in English. Those were fun. And our church, we'd have church school. The priest would go to the school, line us up, take us down to the church school, taught us all about the Bible, pray, how to pray. And we had to learn. I had other sisters. There's one sister just younger than I. We were almost like twins. We grew up together. We had to join the choir, and it was all in Russian. We didn't know how to read Russian. We learned by ear all the Russian music for the church. And it was a lot of fun. I miss those days. Yeah. Then I try to tell my grandchildren, I say my grandchildren them think I'm nuts. Yeah.
Thank you, Z.
Niko, I was gonna ask Kuka if she can talk about her job during the government days, during the fur seal harvest, and I would like to hear her speak about that and what her job was actually.
Sure,
Oh,
Kuka.
yeah. After I got back, I separated from my husband. I lived with my parents. I had 4 children. And Phyllis's dad, Richard Heine, was hiring people to work at the processing plant, I started off cutting seal ears. The men would go out to seal harvest, get up 4 o'clock in the morning, go out to the rookeries, stay out there till 5, from 8 to 5, and they'd have them load all them seal pelts on an old dump truck and take it to this one building they called the wash house. They throw all them seal skins in a big tank, let them soak overnight, get all the blood off them. Then they take them into the blubber place where they dump them in a big tank, and I had to cut the ears off the seal pelts. Then after they cut the ears off, the men would take them and put them on them blubber beams, and they blubber them by hand. Then later on in the years, they got a couple of blubber machines. That was faster than the men blubbering by hand. Then after they blubbered them, they take them to another building they called the brine house. They put them in another tank, and they have a big wheel that lets the skins go round and round in the salt, in the brine water, for a day. Then after that, they take them to another building. They stack them in stacks of 100 each and let them stay in a dry place to let them get kind of dry so they can put them in barrels. They waited for at least a week to let them dry, and then they take them back to in front of the building. I used to lay the pelts flat on a table and pour a handful of salt and boric acid all over on the white side of the skin. Then we'd fold them and we'd roll them so they'd fit in the barrels. I think they had at least 150 skins in one barrel. Then later on, as the years passed, they started using boxes, wooden boxes. I think they took about 250 seal pelts in one box. Then they'd ship them out. After the government left the island, there was no more processing plants. Nobody wanted the skins anymore. That was fun. I worked in all the buildings. It was good. They never had women work there before, and then later on, the county started hiring women. So there was a bunch of us women working in the processing plant. I think I worked in all the buildings. I liked it. It was fun.
Well, thank you, Kuka.
Yeah.
So, Jacob, I would like to ask you, what connects you most to your culture?
Could you repeat the question, please?
Sure. What do you do, or what part of your life connects you most with your culture?
Right now, I participate as a dancer in the Elliott dance group. We haven't done too much lately, and I work in building in IKEA. I started mine quite a few years ago. It's still under construction. I've got the frame. I need to bend the ribs and make the struts and put it together. Hopefully, probably within the next 2 or 3 years, we're able to go back and work on it. The COVID-19 kind of put a damper on a lot of stuff, a lot of the buildings that we could go into, and limited crowds and, people like that. No people coming from off the island. Mark Daniels is a good guy that knows how to work on Nikias, and hopefully we would be able to build a negala, and a negala is an open skin boat, similar to what they call a bidar that we used to use for boats. The bidar probably was 50 feet long and probably about 15, 20 feet wide, and you would be able to carry a pickup, or if you put two of them together, you'd carry a dump truck, or uh, uh, Grizzly is a rock separator. I worked offloading at East Landing in 1985, and they got a rock separator for separating rocks out of scoria, and we had to put two of the bidars together and bring it in. The Grizzly was almost as big as a crane. If you look at a crane, it had a rock boom going out the front, and we uh, brought that in on one of the two of the bidars that were strapped together. And I would like to work on learning more of the Aleut language also. One thing I kind of forgot to mention, Mary Bordakovsky is one a lot with the people learning the Aleut culture, and Father Michael Lesenkopf was probably one of the first ones that worked with the kids in the school, and he worked there with my brothers and sisters. After I graduated from 8th grade, we only went up to 8th grade at home. I spent a few years in Mount Edgecombe and Chemawa, and was able to experience a lot of different cultures, the Nupiaks uh, and Tlingit and Haidas and Tsimshians and Sitka when I went to school, Mount Edgecombe. Then when I went to school in Chemawa, there was a lot of different tribes from Washington, the Quinault tribe, there's Coeur d'Alene tribe from Idaho, and a lot of different tribes there. And I also spent 8 weeks in Phoenix, Arizona, and there was a Hopis and Paiute and a lot of difference. And when I was down there, I could see them doing their dances, and you know, I said I felt kind of jealous because we uh, didn't really do that. And after I graduated from high school in the late 80s, early 90s, some of the dancing and Unangan language was kind of start being brought back to our people here.
That's great.
Thank
Thank
you.
you,
I guess
Jacob.
that's all I have for now.
Thank you. Serafima, I'd like to ask you the same question, especially you're a little bit younger. How does that translate, or what makes it different for you?
Working on unmuting myself here. And Niko, this is, correct me if I'm wrong, the question you're asking is what connects me most to my culture?
Yes, thank you. Sorry about that.
Okay, just making sure we're on the same page. I mean, I have multiple things that connect me to my culture. One, especially being my job right now as the local and traditional knowledge coordinator. That's given me a lot of time and motivation, I guess, to really sit down with our elders. My favorite thing to do the last 2 summers was at the seal harvest that we do every June, July, start late June, early July through August. These are local, the seal pup harvest. And I participate, and I would just try to pick our elders' brains. That was actually kind of where I was able to convince Kuka Z to start filming some YouTube videos with me in an effort to try to have more records. We started to do traditional cooking. So far, we have one cooking video out with 2 different ways to cook seal isalad, which is cut up seal meat and gravy over rice. And hopefully eventually we'll be able to get more videos out. But I think the biggest thing that connects me to my culture is just being home. I spent 7 or 8 years away from St. Paul, and I came back one summer on a whim for a visit. I stayed a month, and the night that I landed back in Anchorage, I told my parents, hey, I'm moving home. It's time for me to go home. So I spent a month in Wasilla packing things and figuring out how to get a plane ticket and where I was going to stay when I moved home. 7 years later, here I am with my 18-month-old son, who I've been super happy to be able to bring out and try to get him. You're never too young to learn about your culture. And this year I was able to bring Jay out to the seal harvest with me and have him strapped to my back as I'm butchering seal, participating in harvest. That was really nice, and I'm so thankful that I have those pictures. Those are something I'm gonna have to get printed and framed. Definitely being here and taking advantage of who you're around. Ask your elders questions. I almost guarantee you they'll sit down and talk with you for hours. There's been times where I've had to run up to Kuka's house for what I thought was going to be 10 minutes to get a signature or to give her a couple of pieces of paper. And the next thing I know, I look up at the clock and I've been sitting at her table for 3 hours listening to stories of how it used to be growing up here, or the trouble she used to get into, or different meals that her mom used to make that she just remembered. Like in the Isla video, that was a recipe that her mom used to make for her when she was younger, and she remembered it. So we had to bring back an old recipe. But definitely take advantage of your elders, sit down with them, let them tell you those stories, record them if they're willing.
Thank you, Sarah. That's fantastic. I have to say, your video is wonderful. I've watched it multiple times and I have sent it to so many people. So if you keep making more, I will be your #1 fan. Martin, I'd like to ask you the same question. What connects you to your culture, especially and home? Because you are a little bit different than our other 3 panelists in that you live here in Juneau, so you're very far away from home. So how do you remain connected?
Well, I definitely remain connected through this work of working on all these projects with Funtor Bay and the lands bill, and trying to get panels put out in Funtor Bay so that people know what they're coming across in Funtor Bay, and you know, just meeting you and work, you know, working with the museum project, and we've also done a Juneau Voices project here where my wife and I have shared our stories about you know, really sad stories, but unique stories, because you know, my wife's great grandparents were also in internment camps at the same time as my grandparents were in internment camps, but her grandparents were Japanese, and mine were Aleut, and they're granted they're in internment camps for 2 different reasons. You know, little did they know, they would, you know, the Japanese people and the Aleut people would win a lawsuit against the U.S. government for the way they're treated at that time. So, so all this work that's been going on here in Juneau and has kept me connected. But you know, culture-wise, I grew up in St. Paul all my life until I left to go to Job Corps, whenever I was 19 or 20. And, you know, I knew how to quarter up a seal from a pretty young age, just from watching the men do it. You know, these guys that can go and quarter up a seal are professionals. The craft of of taking a seal apart is a, you know, you got to see it to believe how good these men are, and over time at quartering up these seals, and just the way they're, how good they've got at doing this work of getting seals and getting food. I learned how to do that. I'm really proud of that. I know how to quarter up a seal, and I learned just from watching, you know, and never took a class on it or anything. But you know, I grew up off that food. You know, my dad wasn't rich. We grew up poor. You know, we had you know, we always had seal meat in the freezer, no matter what, and a little bit of rice, and that was dinner for a lot of times, or fish, or you know, in the summertime you have wild celery. I remember getting full off of eating puchkis. They're called, you know, they're called wild celery. I grew up eating that in the summertime, and I would that's just, that grows on the land. You know, I remember getting full eating that during the day, and so that's what keeps me connected and keeps me grounded um, in these times.
Thank you, Martin. So for Martin and Sarah, both of you grew up on St. Paul, but currently live in two different places. So I wanted to ask both of you in turn, let's start with Sarah and then move to Martin. Why did you choose to live where you live? I know, Sarah, you touched a little bit on it in your previous comment, but would you mind maybe telling us a little bit more about why St. Paul versus somewhere else?
Yeah. So yeah, like I said earlier, my parents and my brother and I, we moved out of St. Paul when I was 11. We lived in Anchorage for a year, and then we moved to Wasilla, where we continued to live, and my parents actually still live right now. So at the point of being 7 years away from not coming back home after we moved from St. Paul, my brother and I would come back every summer for a couple of months. So we at least got our fix. We got our fix for the year of being home. Summer times in St. Paul, if you've been here, you know what I mean. Everyone comes back. All the fishermen come back with their families. And 4th of July, you have to be in St. Paul for 4th of July. That's almost a week-long celebration here. There's nothing like it. There's that sense of community and that sense of safety. Growing up in St. Paul, you had your limits. You couldn't go out of town or, you know, stay away from the dock, but you had free roam of the town, and there was no hiding anything you did. Your parents knew what you did before you got home if you were in trouble. Like Cook was talking about earlier too, everyone watches out for each other. We've all got each other's back. So living in the city is a lot different than living in a small community where you know everybody, where you're related to everybody one way or another. Almost anyone that I talk to on a regular basis here, you're comfortable leaving your door unlocked. If you hear somebody walk in your house, you're not on edge. You look over and realize who it is so you can greet them by name. And when I came back in 2013, I came home for 4th of July. My Crusa, my godfather, paid for a ticket home because I was on Facebook talking about how much I missed St. Paul, how much I missed the 4th of July celebrations, and how it had been so long. So he called me up randomly and offered me to come home. And I still, to this day, living here in St. Paul, I know that I owe the reason why I moved back to him, because if I didn't have that trip home, I probably wouldn't have moved home. I wouldn't have realized how much I really missed it, and how at that time in my life it was time for me to come home. It was time for me to be home for a bit.
Gotcha. Thank you, Serafima. And Martin, I'd like to ask you the same question because you live here in Juneau. So just a difference of choices, and I'd love for you to speak to that a little bit.
Thank you. It's funny. I remember listening to Simeon Swetzoff, who I grew up fishing with, starting when I was 16. I remember him saying something whenever he was younger, whenever he was leaving St. Paul for the first time, for whatever reason, maybe it was to go to school or something, but in his mind, he said, I'm finally get to go to America, I finally get to go to America. In his mind, he was going to America, and so it's such a wild way to think. But that was kind of how they thought. And then you hear people think, like I remember hearing and watching a video of Greg Freitas say, for the longest time I grew up, all I ever thought was St. Paul was the only place that ever existed, I mean, it's so crazy, but why would you think otherwise, when you're growing up so far out there? But I moved away from St. Paul to further my education is why I moved away. I left to go to Alaska Job Corps, and I was going to pursue carpentry. That's what I wanted to do. I wanted to become a carpenter, and it was not really a choice. I had a lot of people who helped me get along through my last couple years in high school that were made sure I follow my education one way or the other, whether it was going to college or going to a trade school, and I chose a trade school. And so I left St. Paul, and I lived in Anchorage for Palmer for about a year, and I got a job up on the slope, and after Job Corps, and I stayed working up on the slope for a couple of years while I lived in Anchorage, and no, I don't know. I just I didn't, I didn't budget my money very well when I was living in Anchorage, and I felt I got really broke, and then eventually I lost my job up on the slope, or I left my job to pursue a job fishing, where the St. Paul Fishermen's Association had bought a real brand new boat, and the manager of that boat asked me to fish on the boat as a deckhand, and Jeff Kaufman. And so in 2007, 2008, I quit my job and went down to Anchorage. I packed up all my stuff, mailed all of it to my sister Bernice in St. Paul, and flew down to Oregon, where they're working on this brand new boat. And we steamed that boat all the way up to the Pribilofs to go halibut fishing that year. And so it was just kind of crazy, but that's kind of how I left the island and came back for a little while. And I live here now because I met my wife, and we have kids. My wife is from Mangoon, and we live here in Juneau now. Juneau is nothing like St. Paul, and it's a real city setting. You step right outside of my apartment, my kids are playing in a parking lot, and they can't just you don't leave your door unlocked here in St. Paul. If somebody walks in, you're curious as to who it is. So it's really different, and I really do want to move home. My wife knows this. I want to move home for a short period of time and let my kids, for one, get to know my family, because they've been raised here and they do kind of know my family a little bit, their aunties and uncles, but they don't know a lot of their cousins and their close relatives. And I think they're really missing out on that. So I really do want to do that. And I wish I could do that sooner rather than later, before my kids grow up. And yeah, so that's why I live here. I got a good job with Plinkett and Haida, and on the school board now, and so yeah, that's why I'm here right now.
Thank you, Martin. I'd like to circle around back to the evacuation and the internment. And I'd like to ask Kuka and Sarah, what do you want the public to most know about the evacuation and the internment? I know several of you have touched about there's just so much history there. There's so much to tell. I know it's something that we talked a lot about in the museum because you can't put everything into an exhibit, try though you might. So what would you both specifically want those watching here tonight and then possibly later to know about this particular event? And Kuka, I'll maybe start with you if you don't mind.
Perhaps. Yeah, Funtor, a couple of years ago, I took Jacob's mom down to Funtor. I escorted her. She's an elder. I've never seen Funtor. I've never been there. I was born in 1948, and this was going on 1942, 43. When I went to Funtor, I felt kind of angry. You know, I used to hear my mom and her friends talk about Funtor. I think they had a lot of fun there. They were there when they were teenagers, but they didn't like the way they were living. They didn't have much food, much clothing, blankets and stuff. When I went there, I felt sad and mad. How the people lived there, how they managed to get out. They couldn't get out of Funtor because it's surrounded by water. Just made me think of home. It's all water. And my mom used to talk about them outhouses or go to some place, and they couldn't go into a forest or the woods there because there was too many wild animals or something there. But I think they managed. They were teenagers then. Her and her friend used to talk, and I'd hear them talking in Aleut, and they'd be laughing. Then they'd get angry. They were mad at the government for the way they were being treated. But and then today I always say maybe the St. George people and St. Paul people never used to get along because they were in one building. I used to hear my mom and her friend Marvy talk about St. George people. And, you know, I said, why should they be angry at St. George people? We're all Aleuts, we're all the same. Maybe they were jealous or something. Then they'd get mad. Then I'd ask my mom, how come you people don't get along with St. George people? And she'd say, liar. I'd say, why you guys don't get along? She'd just say, she wouldn't say anything. She'd just sound angry when we asked her stuff about St. George. Then later on, I found out she was jealous. My dad had ex-girlfriend there from St. George. My mom used to be jealous all the time. Yeah. Them St. George people, some of their Aleut language is kind of different from St. Paul. They have some kind of different dialect. So when Uncle Greg and I would go to Unangax and Aquilina's using St. George dialect, Uncle Greg and I wouldn't understand what she was trying to say because it was different. I think Aquilina's using the Aleut language from St. George and some from Atka. Akutan almost have the same dialect as St. Paul people. They sound the same almost. Atka is a way different dialect. I think they're deeper language than our language. And it was hard. For me, when I went to Funtor, it was hard. I was angry, I was mad. That's the first time I've seen it. Going to the cemetery there, walking in the woods. I'd see some of the old, top of the old coal stoves out in on the ground, some of the garbage on the ground there in the woods. When I first walked in the woods, it was kind of dark. It was almost like walking in a cave. It was kind of scary. And then Jacob's mom, I took her to Funtor Bay. Jacob's mom, that's how I heard of Funtor Bay. Yeah.
Oh, thank you,
It
Kuka.
just,
Thank you. Serafima, I'd like to ask you the same question. What do you think the general public should know about the evacuation and internment?
I think just one of the basics is this wasn't that long ago. What's been kind of eye-opening to me, even since I was little, was how little this part of history is known. It's not talked about anywhere. When I went to school in Anchorage and Wasilla, the Pribilof Islands were barely ever even known. I always had to pull out my hand and, you know, make Alaska and point into the middle of nowhere and say, if you look at a map, there's two tiny little dots over here. They're not there on accident. There's people there. Yep. So evacuation and internment wasn't that long ago. This, when I think of it, what happened, it's I guess in a way it's eye-opening that if things were any different than what did happen, the life I live right now wouldn't be. My grandmother was born right after Funtor Bay, right after they came home. If anything would have happened to my great-grandmother, my great-grandfather, anything that, you know, would have happened to them while they were in Funtor Bay, maybe my grandma didn't be here. My boyfriend's dad was born in Funtor Bay. And him, along with anyone else who was born during internment, are really lucky to survive with how horrible the conditions were. No running water, no heat. These were abandoned buildings that Unangan were interned in. They had outhouses over the water, right where the kids were playing, where the fish were. The conditions that they were faced in Funtor Bay were uncalled for, to say the least. And the biggest thing is it really wasn't that long ago. And I'm so happy about these projects and the exhibit to start sharing the history and getting the word out.
Well, thank you so much, Sarah. Following off of that question, I'd like to ask Jacob and Martin. Both of you have been incredibly involved in this Funtor Bay project for quite some time. And I'd like to ask you both, starting with Jacob, if you don't mind, to tell us a little bit about how you want the internment to be remembered.
Looking at the exhibit there and talking about Funtor Bay and stuff like that, it was a real hard time for moving off the islands and living someplace where they'd never been before. But one thing, you know, we don't have any trees here. I remember my mom talking about it. She was only 8 years old and when she left, and I remember her talking about, seeing trees for the first time, and they had a hard time. My grandparents moved Juneau from Funtor Bay, and they both worked there. My mom talked about how it was, they didn't have food all the time, and running around in Juneau and playing, and being hungry and eating potatoes, and hardly having any bread, and no room for candy and stuff like that. My dad was 10 years older than my mom. He was 18 when he got down there, and he also joined the military. And when he was down there, he talked about uh, working in Percy's Cafe. I guess it's called the Viking down there in Juneau now. But he also was in the army. He joined the army and spent some time in Whittier and some of the other places. And while he was in the military, uh, any of the other guys from the community that were in the military also uh, were the guys that harvest fur seals. And so they had to go back to the islands and leave their family behind. And, that would be pretty hard for our people there. Usually the men were the providers for the people, and they had to go home. And while they were gone, it was pretty tough for the ladies to live down there. And they talk about the buildings didn't really have rooms. They had blankets separating each other's, and that's pretty tough. If you're used to living in your own home, then you go live someplace in a big building, and you have, you know 10, 20, 30 families living there in a room that's by blankets. Be tough for the people. But one thing I want to bring up, uh, even though it was hard for our people to live down there, they also met with Click and Haida people from down there, and they had uh, tribal governments down there, and they learned a lot from them. So when our people came back to the islands after uh, being down there, they found out, they don't really have to uh, do what the government was having them do. We were serfs of the government, or virtual slaves, all that time. So after they went down to Funtor Bay, our people learned a lot about tribal governments and set up a government after they came. Gabe Stepton, Father Ilari Gromoff, Peter Karchigan, John Masikin, and there was one more guy I can't remember off the top of my head. All got together and started forming a form of tribal government. And our tribal government, thankfully, was set up by those guys with help from the people that they ran into down there. The last time we presented a painting to the TNH uh, tribe down there, that thanking them for all the help that they did with our people. And I don't think we were able to vote till 1965 or 1966. And so, even though we were down in Funtor Bay, it was hard time, but we learned a lot from a lot of the people down there. And thanks to the Tlingit and Haida tribes for working with our people and helping us get set up. Thank you.
Thank you, Jacob. Martin, I'd like to ask you the same question. How do you think that the internment should be remembered?
Thank you, Niko. I think the most important thing that we as a group here in Juneau and St. Paul, Jacob, Kukazi, Serafima, all of us, Beth, what we're all trying to do is put a spotlight on a dark piece of history that happened, that not too long ago, under a government that's still in power right now above us. And I think the most important thing to take away from all of this is to remember it. The most important thing to do is to remember it. And if we don't remember it, then we could repeat it. That's the entire purpose of having history class. And you know, those who don't remember their history are bound to repeat it. So I think that's the most important thing. If you look in any history books throughout high school or even college, you're not going to find this history in any of those books, any of those textbooks right now. You have a hard time finding it on Google right now. So that's a sad thing, right? And we don't want it to be like that. So I think what we're all trying to do here as a team is to point a spotlight on this piece of history and make it so that nobody ever forgets what happened. You know, my grandma, Haratina Krukov, and my grandfather, Agafon Krukov Sr., and my other from my that was from my mom's side. My dad's side is Alexei Stepton and Olga Zaharov, who married my grandfather, and they're, you know, those are my grandparents that were there. My dad was born down there. He's lucky to have survived. He's born at St. Anne's Hospital here in Juneau, and you know, they're all lucky to survive. They all had a lot of great grandkids. My you know, I can't even imagine how many grandkids each of my grandparents have now. But you take all the grandkids and how big our families have gotten since my grandparents, multiply that times the 40 or the 20% of people that died during that time. That's the extent of loss that's come from this time in Funtor Bay. It's a horrible thing that happened here in America, and we don't ever want it to happen again. And in times like this, especially nationwide problems like George Floyd, or the people that are being held at the borders in Mexico, or you know, racism, you know, whenever one human thinks less of another human, usually the person that's thought less of, bad things happen to them because they don't care about that person. They don't think of them as equal, you know. And that's what happened in this case in a really bad way. So the most important thing here is to remember this history. We need to try to get it into textbooks somehow. And it's our job to make sure that nobody ever forgets this and nobody ever has to go through this again. That's what I think is the most important thing people should remember about the internment at Funtor Bay.
Thank you so much, Martin. I think that really resonates with just about everyone who's been working on this project, definitely. And coming from an academic standpoint, you know, this isn't my history, it's not my story, and trying to find academic resources talking about the evacuation and internment was incredibly difficult. So I again and again say how much I appreciate all of you who've worked on this project and shown such dedication, both in St. Paul, here in Juneau, and St. George, and Anchorage. It's just been absolutely fantastic. And to kind of wrap up our evening, Sarah, I'd like to ask you, what does the future hold, do you think, for not only remembering this event, but life in the Pribilofs? Where do we go from here? What does the future look like? Just to give you a really narrow question to end on.
Right, we have another hour, right?
Exactly.
I got time. Well, I guess I'm gonna try to keep it brief and just talk about a couple. So first off, when we're talking future of the project, excuse me, Niko had mentioned earlier that the committees have been working on 3 separate projects, being the bill to protect the land, the exhibit, and the panels to be put on site in Funtor Bay. And I'm hoping that once session opens back up, I think that's when our bill will kind of get moving again. Maybe after I finish what I'm saying, Niko or Martin can chime in on the bill. I think they have a little more knowledge on where that's at than I do. But the panels that we're hoping to put up next June are coming along great. That's super exciting. And I know there's been talks of hoping to figure out how to bring this exhibit virtually. So I do believe that Niko, Beth, and I will keep in contact and figure out how we could make that happen and get that shared, so that way folks through these times of COVID, for those that don't want to or can't travel to Juneau to visit the exhibit, we can try to make that happen. We're also hoping to eventually turn the exhibit or information or parts from the exhibit into a traveling exhibit. That's another idea we've discussed, and we'll hope to continue on as we move forward to not only bring this traveling exhibit to St. Paul, but also to St. George, where parts will stay forever. Excuse me. Okay, project. And I really don't think I could talk a whole lot on the future of the Pribilof. Can we really talk about the future of what's going on where we're at? There's no guaranteeing. Of course, I hope that St. Paul continues to thrive with everything going on here, upgrades at the store, regulations changing. Last year, we were able to have our first legal first seal pup harvest. That's still underway this season. Actually hoping to hold a harvest tomorrow. I'm sure Kuka's hoping we're able to do that, so I could be knocking at her door in the afternoon with some seal for her. There's a lot. I'm super hopeful that with this project, the traveling exhibit happens. What I've already been thankful about with this project is the attention that we've been able to get just on Facebook alone. I'm not in Juneau to see how it's going and how many people are going to view the exhibit, but just on Facebook, between Juneau-Douglas City Museum's Facebook and the tribe's Facebook, being able to share the posts, just tidbits of information and seeing it being shared all over. I'm seeing more and more community members or tribal members that don't live on St. Paul share it and talk about it more. So, and like Martin was saying, all of us on the committees really just wanting to shed some light on history. That light's coming. It's coming, and that makes me really happy. One of the programs that ECO does here on St. Paul is Pribilof Days, and that's every September. This year, I was actually supposed to be taking class time during Pribilof Days and talking more about the Funtor Bay evacuation and internment, because it's not in a history book and it's not talked about in school. So we had planned on me taking advantage of the week that we are in school doing different programs, bringing scientists in, that I would have taken some time to try to teach some of our history, to talk more about it, to get a little in depth with the students, since it isn't in the history books. So hopefully when, God willing, COVID ends and our worlds get back to normal and the schools are accepting people to come in and teach, we'll be able to at least start here in St. Paul with the St. Paul and St. George students during Pribilof Days, talking more about the internment and evacuation. And I hope that eventually it grows from there and it's able to be talked about more. Maybe we can have work with somebody at some point to get it in a history book and get it into a curriculum. Those are my goals.
Thank you, Sarah. I know it's probably important for us to note that everyone who's been working on this project, we've put at least the first round of the exhibit up. We're constantly adding more as we go. And I think you said one of the important things to note is that it's not done. This project is not done. Even if we accomplish those 3 initiatives that we talked about, if a bill goes through, we get those panels up, that's not the end. And I think that we're all still constantly working towards more goals, which is an amazing project to be a part of. And so in closing, I would like to thank all of our 4 wonderful panelists, Kukazi, Jacob, Serafima, and Martin, for joining us. Thank you for putting up with all of our questions and tests. And I've been keeping an eye on questions from the group, and I don't think that we have any that I've seen. Just some really nice comments, which we really appreciate. And so I think we're going to wrap up this amazing discussion. And I would just like to remind everyone that this is going to be saved and reshared both on the City Museum Facebook page and on our YouTube channel. And we'd like to remind everyone who hasn't been able to come in to see the exhibit, it is still on display and will be on display until October of 2021. And we're open Monday through Thursday, 10 to 4. And currently admission is free due to the generosity of Dawn and Alma Harris. So feel free to stop by anytime. And again, just thank you everyone for attending, and thank you to our wonderful panelists. And I hope you all have a great rest of your evening.
Niko.
Niko,
Martin, go ahead.
I had one comment before you decided to hang up there. I wanted to mention as one thing that happened after the evacuation, there's some communities along the Aleutian chain that are no longer inhabited, Atu and Makushan, and off the top of the head, I could think might be 1 or 2 more communities that aren't there anymore. So I wanted to bring that up. The evacuation also abandoned a few communities that aren't there anymore.
Perfect. Thank you very much for the reminder, Jacob. Sorry, just really quickly, I apparently got the days wrong. We're open Thursday through Sunday, 10 to 4. But Martin, sorry, you also had something that you wanted to say before we closed out for the evening?
I just wanted to give a shout out to some really important people that have contributed heavily to this project and really got it started. And that's KJ Metcalf, of one of the long-term presidents of Friends of Admiralty Island. He is the one, the driver behind getting that trip organized to Killisnoo whenever I first met them in 2014. And my wife is the one that spotted that in the newspaper and got us tickets to go on that trip. So KJ Metcalf and all the folks at Friends of Admiralty Island have done amazing work and have supported this all the way. They've spent a lot of money and time and energy on this. And Rick Yanolino is really huge on getting this organized. Rick has been a heavy lifter on this project. And I just want to say a shout out to my representative, Sarah Hannon. Sarah Hannon picked up the Funtor Bay land protection bill immediately as soon as she got elected to office, and she learned about it from the previous representative, Sam. I forgot his last name. Sorry. So she brought this bill forward. It would have passed last year, but it died because COVID happened and they had to shut down the legislature really quick. So from what I understand, they already pre-filed this bill, and it's going to be there on day 1 whenever the legislature starts up again. And of course, Niko, Beth, you guys are amazing. You guys are the main organizers for all of these great meetings, and you guys are just invaluable. This is something whenever we first started working on this in 2014, I felt like I couldn't get any traction or nobody was really paying attention. And so I was really excited about it. And then I felt like nobody was listening, and I was like calling home. And so after all these years, we have all this work going on around it. And I'm just so thankful. And I just can't say enough to all of you, Sarah, Jacob, Kukazi, everybody who's contributed to this. Thank you guys very much.
Thank you, Martin. I know it's been wonderful working with such an amazing group, and I think everyone is super grateful for each other, and it's just very nice to keep that going. We did have one question actually asking if there was a virtual tour of the exhibit on our YouTube channel, and unfortunately we don't have one yet. It's something that we're working on. We were applying for different grants to try and bring it into the digital world in a more interactive way, but we haven't gotten there just yet. So hopefully there will be something that's a little bit more interactive and visible here in the next month or so coming online. So keep your eyes peeled, and thank you very much. All right, I believe.
So before we go, somebody mentioned Sam Keto. I think that's who Martin was going to talk about. And one other person that we haven't thanked is Marianne Alpin. She's with the Forest U.S. Fish and Wildlife, and she was the one that came up to St. Paul with you and started our discussion on Funtor Bay and stuff like that.
Definitely, and also Mike Livingston from the Aleutian and Pribilof Island Association. We really do have a lot of people to thank, and without so many dedicated people, this project would not be where it is. So speaking for the museum, at least, we're very, very grateful to everyone who has constantly been involved, and I know a lot of people have been working on this longer than I have, so just very grateful. And hopefully we'll see more things coming in the future.
Niko, sorry, I know we could probably talk all night, but I did want to mention one thing, that because this thing comes up every time we have a public event about Funtor Bay, there's always a number of people that from the Aleutian chain and from all the other communities that were involved in the internment that say, what about the folks that were in Ward Cove or Burnett Inlet and all these other places, and I say to them that we're working on Funtor Bay right now, and once we get our work done or near complete in Funtor Bay, we do plan on turning our attention to these other places, such as Killisnoo. Killisnoo's cemetery is in complete shambles. All the crosses are down. You don't even really know where the crosses are, and it's extremely disrespectful. It's on private land. The folks there were not very happy with us being there in Killisnoo at the time. They didn't want anything to do with trying to help us anymore. So there's a lot more work to be done in this area. As far as the future of this project, it's not going to be over anytime soon. I can tell you that. And we know about the other communities and the other locations and the other cemeteries where people have been, and we plan to get to those in the future.
Well said, Martin. Definitely with specifically the exhibit, it does mostly focus on the Pribilovian Unangan from St. Paul and St. George who came to Funtor Bay. It is the area closest to us here in Juneau, but we do have an entire gallery dedicated to the 5 camps plus Wrangell that were here in Southeast Alaska. So very good point to make that, as we said, there's still much work to do, and we want to make sure that we're recognizing all those who were involved. So thank you to everyone who participated. Very grateful to everyone who watched here live, and to our 4 panelists, Martin, Stepton, Kukazi, Zaneta Melavidov, Serafima Edelen, and Jacob Merculiff. And a quick thank you to Beth Weigel, who is our director here at the museum. She's been running tech for me. To everyone who's still here, thank you very much. This is our very first Zoom program for the museum, so thank you for bearing with us as we get used to this format. again, thank you to everyone who participated, and I'll hopefully speak to everyone soon. Right. I am going to end the recording.